Good evening, everybody. My name is Miss Reid. I'm the creator of DamnDaddy.com, where daddy issues drive discussion, and this is the discussion room. Tonight, we are starting season 2 with a special guest, LaTisha Carr, founder of Where Do You Dream? And I'm going to let Tish tell you some more about herself. We met over a year ago at Raven Jones's Pink Slip Retreat, and she was leaving. She was only there for the first day, and she gave me her number at our cars, and I was like, oh wow, that's really cool of her. And little did I know that so much would happen within this past year. She's the person who birthed the idea for the Fatherless Father's Day brunch and helped bring it to execution. And I'm really excited for you guys to get to know a little bit of what I know about Tish tonight. So hey, Tish.
Hey, Mika. So, hey, everybody. My name is LaTisha Carr, or you can just call me Tish, like everyone else does. Like Shamika said, I'm the founder of Where Do You Dream? And I really want to just share a little bit about my journey to get to where I am really quick. So I started Where Do You Dream as a blog in 2014. And so 4 years later, flash forward, it has turned itself into a life coaching program for millennials who are ready to dream chase and go after goals and dreams. But initially it started as a blog because I was in a really dark spot and really just didn't know what to do with myself. And I was in the airport going to Vegas and was like having this whole quarter life crisis in the middle of the airport, like a weirdo, and thinking like, what am I going to do with myself? And at that moment, I thought I was going to start a travel blog. So hence the Where Do You Dream? I was in the airport. I was like, what are my dreams? What are my goals? And that's what that's what the Lord put in my spirit. It was between that and Dreams and Adventures. But I stuck with Where Do You Dream? But then it really ended up turning into a blog where I was encouraging myself and also hoping to encourage other people. And over the last 4 years, I've done a lot of work on myself. And so I am a believer in paying it forward. So I use what I've learned for myself to pay it forward to others to help them move their lives, dreams, and goals forward as well. So I'm super excited to be here. I'm super proud of Shamika because a year ago, she was like, being real shy and anxious about starting these kind of things, but she has so many dope ideas, and I'm just so excited and proud of her.
Thank you. I didn't know that backstory about Where Do You Dream, so that's really interesting that you started it in an airport.
Yes, in an airport, crying my eyes out over a breakup, and just everything in my life felt like it was falling apart, and I was just going through it, and I was boo-hooing on my way to Vegas. Like, who cries on their way to Vegas? This girl.
You know what? I realized, like, listening to you just now and listening to several other people, it seems like, myself included, we all started these things when we were experiencing a low point in our lives. Mm-hmm. So that's very interesting. All of the beautiful things that can be built from the bottom.
Yes. Started from the bottom, now we here.
Right. All right. So things that I know about Tish, like I said, it was her idea to have the Fatherless Father's Day brunch. It started out for her wanting to talk about grief and loss and overcoming those things, and just helping other people have a safe space to have that conversation on Father's Day. But tell us, from your perspective, where do you want to begin? Where do you want us to discuss your journey as far as your relationship with your dad?
So I think that's a good question. Maybe let's start with when my father passed away, because then I can work my way backwards and then work my way forward, right? So my father passed away in 2012 from cancer. He found out he was sick. Well, my family found out he was sick, and within a week he passed away from cancer. But I always say my father died from a broken heart because his significant other had passed away about a year and a half before that, and I don't think he ever really got over that. Also, he was very focused a lot on like the people he had lost in his life. He always told me about friends that he had when he lived in Jersey and different places that he had lost and they were no longer around. So I just feel like it was one of those things where what was happening outwardly manifested inwardly. But that's just my belief. That's not like a official thing, but I really, really see it that way. So I really feel like my dad, although he passed away from cancer, a lot of that had to do with like the heartbreak and grief and his own internal stuff he was going through as well.
Okay. So losing your dad in 2012, how old were you?
Oh my gosh. How old was I in 2012? 22? 23. 23.
What was that like for you? Like, I just saw, think Janae had retweeted someone on Twitter talking about how we need to start having conversations about having aging parents. Like, that's not something that's discussed often enough in our communities. And I know that I have several friends who lost their parents in childhood. One person lost her mom at 17, and then her dad like a day later, but 10 years in one day after she lost her mom. So just, dealing with that loss at different ages impacts you in different ways. So how did you handle that at 22, 23 years old?
So I actually had lost my grandmother about 8 months before. And my grandmother raised me. So I was already grieving when my dad passed away. And I felt like I wasn't prepared mentally or emotionally for the level of grief of losing so many people who I cared about back to back. So I said my dad's significant other passed away a year and a half before. She passed away in January 2011. And then my grandmother passed away in September 2011. And then my dad passed away in May of 2012. And I was just not prepared for the amount of grief and like how to handle that grief, especially because I wasn't raised with a lot of emotional openness. I didn't share my emotions with anyone as a kid, and I just didn't know how to handle that as an adult either. So as an adult, I was going through the grief of losing my grandmother. My boyfriend at the time had lost his mom like a week after my grandmother. It was just so many things that I was just grieving at the time, and I just was not emotionally prepared. And I think that's a conversation that it's hard to have with people because it's hard to talk about how to anticipate grief when someone's parents are alive and well, or someone's, family members are alive and well. So grief is often a topic that only comes up when you're actively grieving. And then you kind of don't want to hear about the stages of grief when you're actively grieving. So I have a degree in psychology. I had just graduated at that point, was working on my master's degree at that point. And I still like, even though I had a degree in psychology and was working on a counseling degree, I still wasn't prepared for the stages of grief at that time. So I think losing parents or losing people who are close to you really has a huge impact on your life that we need to discuss and prepare for, but it's hard to discuss and prepare for because that feeling is like you don't even know what's going to come up. Losing my father brought up so many things in my life that I had no idea was pushed under the rug for 20 plus years. Like, I had no idea. Like, I hadn't even realized that I was continually dating men that were like my father, or like all that stuff came up after I lost him. I didn't realize how important my family was to me and how I wanted to connect with my father's side of the family more until I lost him. So it was just so many different things that came up that I just wasn't emotionally prepared for at all.
Sidebar, the state of New York, I saw an article on Facebook, just approved 3 months of paid bereavement leave when you lose a relative, including grandparents. So I definitely think that's something that probably would have been useful to you. But even just hearing how close in time, like, that would have been almost 2 years of you just being at home on bereavement leave.
Yeah, and honestly, I was still in school at the time, and I just got back into my regular routine. So really, if just to tie it back into my intro, the 2014, I had gotten out of school in December of 2013. I felt like my life was falling apart throughout the very beginning of 2014. It just kind of all came to a head in September of 2014. But really, I think part of it was that I had pushed all that grief behind me and just try to finish school and do that kind of stuff. And that had a huge impact. That 2.5 year gap of time, like, really came and bit me in the butt several years later.
So you talked about how losing your dad brought up so much for you. What are some of the things, you mentioned one of them being learning to be reflective on your relationship practices, but what are some of the things that came up for you after losing your dad?
So my father would always, me and my father weren't always super close, but I always related to my father a lot, if that makes sense. Like, it was just a person that I could relate to what he was going through, which is kind of weird because he wasn't in my life consistently all the time. But he always told me family first. Like, he would always say, these are your brothers. This is your family. This is who you're related to. And he always emphasized family first. And when he passed away, I remember being at the gravesite next to my brothers. And I also have a brother in prison. And, that was a whole other level of grief to deal with, him not being able to be there. But just remembering and thinking, like, I'm going to commit myself to being a part of this family, and not just the family I grew up being around a lot, but I made a personal commitment to myself to commit myself to be a part of my father's family, and like spend time with my brothers, spend time with my nieces and nephews, spend time with my aunts and uncles on that side, and my cousins, and those kind of things. And I have stayed committed to that promise, and like I keep it in the back of my head whenever I'm like, oh, I don't want to go here or something. I say, you know what, you made a promise when your father passed away that you were going to put family first, and they're your family, and you don't have your dad here, but he would be very proud of you for putting yourself in a position to be closer to your family members. So that was one of the biggest things that really came up for me, was how much I yearned for that connection with that side of my family.
Do you feel like you took his time for granted while he was here?
Yeah, for sure. I I think I avoided my father a lot as a teenager, or really just most of my life. I avoided my dad a lot. I avoided asking my dad for help when I needed it. I would ask my my aunt, who's my mom's sister. I would be like, "Can you ask my dad if he'll give me his tax info for the FAFSA or like whatever it was?" But my dad was always excited. Any way he could help, he was always really excited to help me. But I would always get someone else to ask. I was really close to his significant other that had passed away. I used to ask her, I would be like, hey, could you ask my dad if, or whatever whatever it was. So, and she really encouraged me a lot to build my relationship with him. So I always give credit to her for that. But I would always try to avoid the conversation a lot. So yeah.
I'm in that space right now. My mom was like, "So when's the last time?" I'm like, "We're not having that conversation." And similar to you, I can talk to his siblings, my siblings, parents, their moms and stuff, but just like talking to him, even though I've done it, I don't know. Just for me,
I
it's
don't know why I was so uncomfortable. I don't
you
embrace.
know what? I have a blog. Can I? I can't hear you. Say something else.
I was just saying I don't know why I was so uncomfortable.
No, but I was going to say I have a blog post coming up about why reconnecting with my biological father feels like stranger danger. So,
yes, that's exactly it. Like stranger danger, but you're not really in danger. Like, they love and care about you, but it still feels like I know you, but I don't really know you.
right.
And I don't want to ask you for stuff. And
Right.
that's really how my relationships in life have been too. It's like, I know you, I love you from over there, and I don't want to ask you for nothing.
Yeah. So I want to talk real quick about something you said at the brunch that stood out to me. You talked about how you lost your dad to life before you lost him to death. Can you explain for the listeners what you mean by you lost him to life?
Yeah, so my father had an alcohol problem my whole life that I literally remember being a child, and my dad, I used to have this beard. I have a picture of him somewhere in here. And he had this beard, and he would kiss me, but it always smelled like beer and cigarettes. Like, I remember his beard specifically, and I remember how the beard felt on my face, everything, right? Like, from a little girl. And so I just remember for Father's Day, this is gonna sound so ridiculous, but for Father's Day, I used to, well, I obviously didn't buy it myself, but my Father's Day gifts to my father would be a pack of Newports and some Rolling Rock beer every year. My aunt would go get it and I would go down to my grandfather's house who lived down the street from me, and that's what my gift to my dad was. So I lost my dad to that kind of stuff before I lost him to lost him in life. I lost him to death. I lost him in life because of the alcohol, because of just the life he lived. And but it's one of those situations where someone loves and cares about you and they just have a problem. And that's that. And he didn't necessarily I also know that he didn't want to be around me when he was drinking heavy or like anything like that. He was very respectful of me in that kind of way. So yeah.
I don't remember what I was watching, but one of the dads, I don't know, I watched lots of stuff like Bad Dad Rehab, all these types of things, but something in particular, one of the men, that's what they said, that it wasn't that they didn't care about their kids, it's that they cared enough about them that they didn't want to be seen at their worst. And for me, I'm just like, so why you ain't just get it together? But understanding that,
I work on that a lot in therapy for my dad and my mom. So why don't you just get it together?
Right. Like,
as an adult, as a 29-year-old, I understand how just getting it together is not as easy as it sounds. So
absolutely. I have my own things to deal with that, I'm like, all right, well, I can see why this might take somebody a while. But I want to talk to you more so about your relationship with your siblings and things, because I know that's something that for me was just like, oh, I'm 15, I got siblings, where y'all come from? But you said that your dad always made it important to you for you to know these are your brothers, this is your family. How have you been able to build that foundation for a relationship? Like, what age did you know about them, and then how do you continue to build upon those relationships?
I knew I had siblings as long as I can remember. All my brothers are older than me, significantly older than me. My oldest brother has a daughter that is my age. Like, me and my niece graduated high school together. So that brother, as a kid, I used to go to his house and play with my nieces. So I knew that relationship, but it was hard to see that as your brother when he's like so much older than you. It was just like an uncle or something, like, kind of. That's not really how I saw him. I knew it was my brother, but it was just kind of like there wasn't a relationship like that there. So sometimes that was how that was introduced. I have another brother. So I have 3 brothers, and then they have brothers too, right? So I have 3 brothers, and then they have 2 brothers. So really there's a total of 5, and I just say they're all my brothers. So it's a little bit confusing, but it is what it is, family. But my one brother, the one that's currently in prison, he's the closest to me in age. He's about 6 years older than me. And I just remember being in like maybe middle school, however old he was able to drive, and him and his girlfriend like took me out for ice cream and like hung out with me. And like, I just appreciated that time with my brother. But that's like one of the only memories I have. Those are my only memories as a child, spending time with my brothers, So it's kind of hard because we're so much different in age, and I'm the only girl. Like, I'm the only girl, I'm the baby. It's like, it's that relationship is hard. But now as an adult, it seems like that age gap doesn't feel as big. It's big, but it's not as big because we're now adults, and I got to pay bills just like they got to pay bills. So every year I go to my brother's house either for Christmas, my oldest brother's house, either for Christmas or Thanksgiving. I make it a conscious effort to do that. My other brothers are always there then too, so I get to spend time with them there. And just making an effort to like be a sister. I don't really know how to be a sister, but I make an effort to do my best to be a sister.
Let's talk about that, because I just feel like we see all of these things in the media, but does anybody really know how to be a sister? Like, or a sibling in general?
Like, unless you're raised with your siblings, I think it's hard to be like, oh, like, like I try to be a good sister. I check on my brothers. I reach out to them. They check on me. Like, even my brother who's in prison, like, I make sure I reach out to him and let him know I'm thinking of him. He always reaches out to me on my birthday. So like, in that way, yeah. But like, other than that, I don't really know what you do with a sibling. Like,
right. So the one that lived in the house with me, we're 10 years apart. She's still in high school. I've been out of the house and paying my own bills for most of her life. So it's just like, it's difficult because I remember when she was younger, she had two goals: one, to be taller than me, and two, she couldn't wait to get to high school so she could have the same teachers I had. And
So,
like in the middle of her freshman year, my mom moved, so that killed her dreams of having the same teachers. But she's taller than me, so I'm like, okay, so now what do you want from life? Like, you know. But other than that, I really don't know how to be her sister. She tells me all the time, "Stop trying to be my mom and just be my sister." I don't know.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have no idea really how to be a sister other than like reaching out to make sure they're good and like check on my nieces and nephews and like that kind of stuff. I don't really know how to be an aunt either. So it's like I don't know how you learn how to do those kind of things. You just do your best and like be the cool aunt that's always going somewhere. That's like who I am.
I tried to be like my aunts, and then I realized, like, you know, inflation is real. Toys R Us don't exist no more. Been sending clothes to kids that I don't get to see, and I just kind of got over it real fast. Like, y'all don't recognize me when I do get to visit. Like, you know what? We'll resume this relationship later when y'all are able to take some type of interest. Because like right now,
7 or 8, when they're about 7 or 8, which is my nieces and nephews are, well, my younger set of nieces and nephews are about 8 and 9 now. Like they're like, oh, that's my aunt Tish, and like she comes and she has toys for me, and I like her. Like,
yeah, they're still little. I think the oldest one should be five right now. So no, you know, it's just like, hey, lady with my mom's face, you're here again.
hey, lady.
So that's it. Um, so you said you wanted to start with your dad's death and work backwards. What else from your younger years do you want to share or find significant to who you are today about your relationship with your dad?
Let's see. I touched on the family part. I touched on the alcohol part, which was a whole thing for me. Like, I like to drink. Like, I ain't got everybody who knows me knows that, like, give me a margarita and this girl's happy. But I also was very cognizant not to let that become a problem. Like, because it's not because of family history. My father, my grandfather, you know, it's a family history thing. So it's like, you got to check yourself on things that you don't even necessarily like that aren't necessarily your fault, like, but you have to check yourself in it. It's like I got to make sure that I don't let myself become addicted. I know that addiction is a part of a thing in my family, and I realized in college that I had addictive tendencies, right? So I never tried drugs or anything like that because I know my family history, and this girl can get addicted to stuff easily. I get on kicks about like I've been drinking this pomegranate tea for like a couple weeks and I just want it all the time. And like, that's a part of the like addiction cycle of just being like, I want this thing over and over and over and over again. Right. I just try to choose better things.
Right.
So like,
Less dangerous addictions.
less dangerous. Yeah. Thing. So that's one of the things that I took early on. I like, one of those things that I marked on a little block and was like, be careful about that. Like, you know, there's little things that like in childhood you just marking your mind up, being like, note to self, and you put it in the back of your mind and it just kind of sticks with you. Addiction is one of the things that I have carried with me, marked on my little notepad that's in the back of my mind of being like, be careful about these kind of things. Relationships, how I treat people. I don't know for sure if I got this from my father, but my father cared a lot about the people around him, and really struggled with letting people go. And I struggle with letting people go too. Like, I'd rather just like have you on a little string and you still be kind of my friend or something like that than let people go fully. And I don't know if I got that from my father or where I got that from, but that's something that I took note of early on in life, just from conversations with him. And it's a note in the back of my head. Or weird stuff like weird stuff that I didn't realize he did that I do too. And I learned that he did when I was a little bit older, like obituaries. This is very weird. Maybe not that weird, but a little weird. I used to keep all the obituaries, like my grandfather when he passed away, my cousin when she passed away. I would keep them in a little like thing. It was like kind of like a keepsake of like people I've lost. And I didn't know until I got older. I think I was a senior in high school. And by that point, I had lost a few people that I really cared about. My dad used to have a bulletin board with all the people he had lost, like their obituaries too. And I was like, that is so bizarre that that's like a trait that I have that I didn't even know he did that too. My mom doesn't do that. My grandmother didn't do that. The people who raised me did not do that. So those are like little small things that are kind of like,
the interesting connections that,
yeah.
it's one of those nature versus nurture things. And it's not the people who nurtured you and who are in the house with you every day. So it's just like, oh, this is me. And then you find out actually later, it's
like, no, actually your dad did that too, sis.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
But yeah, those are just some of the things like from my younger years, like 18 and under years, that I picked up and like realized about myself that I think I kind of relate to my father. Now that I'm older and can kind of look back with, hindsight's 2020, I can see some of the choices that I made in relationships. For sure, my attachment to men in general is very much the same that my attachment with my father was. It's like, I love you from over there. And I always find men who are, not emotionally connected, and I love it. Like I live for it. I'm like, thank you for not being up under me all the time. Thank you for loving me from over there. Like, but that's not healthy either, right?
So I was about to get there. I'm like, okay, so with the counseling degree, is that because for some people they feel like, I met a young lady over the summer who's in a long distance relationship, like states away. They didn't even meet in real life, and then the person moved. Like, no, they met on the internet. This person lives all the way over there. They live over here, and they love it. And to me, I'm like, you know what? I like it when my friend go home and not in my space. But sometimes I don't want to wait 4 or 5 months, or once a month and gotta pay the air. No, so.
I've never done a distant relationship. I mean, like emotionally distant.
No, I understand what you mean, but I'm just saying, like,
To be honest, I promise you, my dad lived like a mile and a half from me, like as a child, like maybe 2 miles at max, like really not that far. I knew he was over there. I knew where he was. I ain't never had to make that much of an effort to go see him or vice versa. And that's really how relationship wise, like I've just, that's the kind of men I end up attracted to. And I didn't realize until a few years ago that was me repeating the habit. Because I was like, I'm not picking they always tell you like you pick men like your father. They tell every girl that, like, I ain't picking no man like my dad, blah blah blah. Like, then I realized, I was like, oh, it's not always about the major traits. It's about some of the nuances that you don't even realize are traits from your relationship with your father, whatever that means to you. So
I think the way that statement has been portrayed and passed down over the years is really a misrepresentation of what that means. Because my friend was here, and I looked at him. He made just one face. He made a face yesterday and looked like my father's brother that was more active in my life. And there's several things that he's done that remind me of other people, but I'm like, this man is just like all of the father figures just in one person. And I don't know if this is a good thing or if it's a bad thing, but like, it just was like, it's so scary sometimes. Like,
it's the way we learn to connect with men in general. And I didn't take that statement as meaning that. I took that as meaning like, oh, you date men who were like, I said my father drank, right? Like, I never dated anybody who was alcoholic ever. So like, even the people that I love the most didn't even drink. Like, they might drink a little bit, but like, so I was like, oh, I'm not dating anybody like my dad. Like, like I just was adamant about it. And then I realized, I was like, but did you look at it from this perspective? No, you did not. Like, and so now in therapy, my therapist is like, girl, you don't need to date nobody. Why don't you just focus on you and do that? And I'm like, you're right, girl, you're right. So I don't know what that's going to look like moving forward, to be honest. But like, now, as you know better, you do better, or you choose better. And so just having that thought in mind now of like how to build relationships with men that are not distant, not emotionally distant, not physically distant, not just not distant in those kind of ways.
Last season in the discussion room, I had a conversation with Valerie, from Val's Bite. She's a dating coach, and she introduced a concept called the abandonment spectrum, and she used herself and her sister as an example of how you either end up kind of like us, where it's like, I like you, but stay over there. or like I think it was her sister that was the like stage 5 clinger that needed to be like in a relationship over and over and over again and like living in with this person. And since she mentioned it to me, I've been like so intrigued with that concept, because I really think that it's not just our dads that help us develop that type of relationship with men in general. Like I said, when I look at the person I've been dating, I see everybody, and it's just really scary. But it really does make me think about the habits we develop based on the type of love we received as children. Like I saw on XO Nicole today, they highlighted a dad who was kissing on his son, and had, if children aren't shown love, they don't know how to love. And I don't know, just even the kids that I work with this past summer and the different types of things they've experienced at such young ages, it definitely plays a part in how you show up and how you receive love. So many different factors that are connected to love are just based on behavior. Like I read an article about volunteerism and how being a tourist in third world countries, or being a child in third world countries that receive high numbers of volunteerism, where you have people constantly coming in your life, and then after a month they're back in whatever country they came from, you don't have that stranger danger instinct, because you're so used to people coming in and leaving, coming in and leaving, coming in and leaving. And I thought about my kids that I worked with this summer, like, they got so attached to me, and then I'm not going to be working with them going forward. Like, I don't like that feeling. I don't like that feeling that I'm contributing to that cycle for them, that they found an attachment, they found a way to trust me, and then now they don't have that access to me anymore. So it just always baffles me when I talk to people like you, or even just think about my own experience. Like, the person who's responsible for creating you is not fortunate enough to have the exposure to this type of material to make them think that way, to make them think that, oh, wait, I don't want you to feel this way, or have, I don't want to mess up your stranger danger instincts and have you just being a stage 5 clinker, or I don't want you to have like super enhanced stranger danger instincts and then you just don't let anybody in. So
Yep. That's me. So one of the things that I pray about consistently is breaking generational curses on both sides of my family, right? Like, I just pray that I am a generational curse breaker. And I know people say that a lot, but like, what I don't think gets discussed, and relating this to just everything we've been talking about, is that sometimes you have to go through difficulties to break a curse, or to break a pattern in your life, right? So like, to break a pattern of inconsistencies in relationships or whatever, it's like you might have to go through some inconsistent relationships to find how to build a true bond, and that might hurt. But to break that barrier so that my children don't experience that, so that they don't have the abandonment issues or those kind of things, like I may have to go through those things right now to find what real connection and intimacy and vulnerability and love and those kind of things are. So those are some of the things that, like, just having the experience that I have with my parents in general, my parents and my grandparents and those kind of things, like just having those experiences, I just think of like, what impact will I have on my children moving forward because of my experience with my parents, and how can I make it different for them intentionally right now while I don't have children, right? So like, not wait until I have kids to be like, oh, let me try something new. Like, learning how to do those different things now before I have children, so that that's not something that they have to experience through me and my experiences. I'm not putting my stuff onto them. So that's like one of the things that, like, as a child of a parent, both of my parents had their own issues or have their own issues. As a child that comes from that, a child that comes from childhood trauma and those kind of things, like, it's things that you have to be cognizant of, and like realize that you might have to do some hard work so that you don't pass that along. Because a lot of, I know my father and my mother, some of my father's traits he got from his father, right? And his brothers, my uncle Frankie, he took a different turn. My uncle Frankie doesn't drink at all, right? But he has his own stuff. Like, so, and being very cognizant of like how you're going to break a generational curse is really important. So
I think that what I've learned I like reading, and I realize that I don't read as many books as I used to, but I have been reading a lot of articles. And to speak to your point about it coming from both parents, like everybody was so excited about this Beyonce line when she talked about how her great great grandchildren are already rich, right? Mm-hmm. So financially, she feels like she's broken a curse, and she feels like her family she set a new generational pattern in motion. But what I learned within the past few years about trauma being passed down through a man's sperm, right? So for men, if you don't heal from your trauma, you are not only, it doesn't matter how you behave with your child in life, it's already in your sperm, it's already in their DNA. So if you were messed up in the moment the child was conceived, you can do whatever you want to do to try and reverse that in that child's life, but you kind of already messed them up, even unintentionally. And then on the flip side of that, I just learned maybe 2 days ago, I read an article that all of a woman's eggs are formed when she is a 4-month-old fetus still inside her mother's womb. So that means when I was still baking in my mama almost 3 decades ago, whatever kids I have were already spewing. So whatever life experiences that she had, you know, aside from how she treated me or interact with me in my life, is already passed down into whatever children I carry. And that's just,
I have a counter argument for that. Because our brains and our bodies are, I always say this wrong, but we have plasticity, right? Plasticity, right? So things can change. So we can rewire those things. So although there's things that are kind of ingrained in us in a way, our bodies are the miracles that we are. Just being here at this age that we are right now is just a miracle within itself, right? And we have the ability, once we start thinking different and acting different, behaving different, to change that around. So yes, you might have that from when you were 4 months old in the womb, but the nurture does matter. And then how you develop, that's gonna break chains further down the line. So not letting yourself get stuck in an idea like it is what it is, like with my family. Because if that's the case, like we was doomed in 1786. Like
right. So no, to be clear though, that wasn't my point, that nurture doesn't matter. It's just that, you know, we're I don't think that people are aware.
You have to think about that.
Right. So, and my grandfather has been saying this, it's your thinking, babe. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So just always being cognizant of that. Like even somebody I work with says things about our kids, and I'm like, you can't say that. Like, you know, even if you believe it to be true, don't say that out in the universe over that child, because you don't know, you cursing them. Like, you know, if I believe, no, my impact is going to make sure that that doesn't come true for that kid, but you standing next to me reinforcing what's already going on with that kid, we working at odds. We might be working together, but our energy is at odds with one another.
That's how relationships generally are. If you think about mothers and fathers, like if one person is doing the work the other person is, your energy is working at odds. I'm gonna use power as an example of this, right? Like Tariq, and how Tariq gets on everybody's nerves. That's because Ghost is out here getting on everybody's nerves, right? Like he's making dumb decisions, and he thought that he was raising his son to be better than him, but really he was just ingraining the same negative behaviors into him through a different avenue. So fatherhood and just like parenting in general, like really is like really interesting to say. I have a lot of thoughts on it. I've taken like a ton of child development classes, so like I have a lot of thoughts on it, but I'm gonna leave it at like there's a lot of things that we have ingrained in us that we have to actively mentally think about in a different way and change, or else we're not going to make any difference in our lineage.
Like somebody was saying about, somebody was saying about you know, disciplining a child, and say y'all so ready to traumatize your children and be proud of it, as far as like physical discipline and things of that nature. And I was thinking about Unsung. I love Unsung. It's what I do. I watch it all the time on Sundays. And one person's dad was saying, this is how I was raised, so this is how I knew to raise my children. So a lot of times when we feel like we came out okay, then we attribute that to the way that the people who impacted my life did things was right because I'm all right. And we rarely take into consideration what else happened in our lives to counteract some of those things. Like I always jokingly say I got one good beating from all the important adults in my life. Like my uncle beat me one time because I refused to go to school. My grandmother beat me one time because I cut some stuff up. Then I thought about like my grandfather's never hit me. You know, me and my mom, I don't really remember getting beatings as a kid from my mom. I think she was just like more so frustrated with me and she would say things to me. But I remember, and then my friend's aunt pretty much raised me too. We were up laughing until like 3:00 in the morning. And she told us several times, like, cut it out. And she used to beat them with a plastic bat. And I got beat with that plastic bat with them that one night because we was up laughing. And I tried to slide underneath like the tall dresser cabinet. But just for me, I was like, one time was enough. Like, oh, y'all serious? You gonna hit me? No, I don't want to be hit. I'm cool on that.
Yeah.
So, but you know, that's just how my brain was wired. Like, oh, this is the consequence. I won't do that again. Where there's other people out here that's like, oh, water is wet. Okay, well, we'll put some more water on me. Like, you know, drown me, and they're just gonna keep doing it. They don't have that instinct to change the behavior based on that consequential action, and they need a different method, a different approach. So
that's a really good point. One of my professors in college, I will never forget when he was talking about just like how things get passed down to us. And he was like, he asked the question of how do you bake a cake, right? So what kind of pan do you use to bake a cake?
oh, it depends on what kind of cake you want to make.
Okay, so say you're making just any kind of cake. What kind of pan would you bake?
Circular 9-inch pan.
Okay, me too, right? Because my grandmother used a circular pan, but my best friend, she always uses like the 9x9 whatever pan to make a cake for almost any kind of cake that she makes, right? Like I always use either a bunt pan or just like a regular circular one. And when he said that, he was like, you don't do that just because. You do that because you learned that from somewhere. And it was never really told to you that this is the way you make a cake, right? Like it wasn't really told to you like this is the only way to make a cake. It was just, you just saw this is the kind of pan that they use to make a cake when you were helping them make a cake. And so internally you think that's how I make a cake. And that's the same thing with how we raise kids. Like you were saying, like if you were spanked as a kid and that's all you know, like that's how you know to deal with your children. And like I always keep that in mind, like with everything around, like it's like, okay, I didn't just this isn't just me. Like I learned this some kind of way, and whether it was passed down to me until I went to my friend's house and she was using a different kind of pan to bake a cake, I was like, oh, I thought we always made round cakes. That's what we do at my house. We make round cakes at our house. Like our cakes are round or they're in a bundt pan, pineapple upside down cakes. Like that's how we make a cake. But you can make a pineapple upside down cake in a square pan or a rectangular pan. Like it's not like you can't do that. And so like changing our mindsets to see like other possibilities and like relationships and like how to be around people, like that's like one of the biggest things that I am continually learning, that I don't have to do things in the way that I was raised to do or the way that I saw as a child, or like I don't have to do things the way my dad did it. And then there's some things that I do want to do like my parents did. Both my parents, our whole family is from West Virginia. Both of my parents left West Virginia when they were in their 20s. My mom moved to California. My dad moved to Jersey. Some kind of way they both made their way back to West Virginia and had me. But but it's like those are things I do want to take on. I do want to move around. I do want to like see the world. I don't want to just have a confined thought of the world. My cousins have asked me before, like, my cousins that live in California, which they live in California because of my mom, because my mom got their dad to move out there, which is a whole different story. But they're always like, how did you get out? Like everybody in West Virginia, like so many people in West Virginia have the same kind of mindset. I was like, honestly, both my parents left, and I knew that as a kid. Like, my dad lived in Jersey, my mom lived in California. I knew that growing up. So that just, for some reason, just knowing that let me know that there was more to the world than just where I grew up. So like, those are things that I do take on, and I do like give, I am thankful for that are kind of ingrained on me. Like, just don't just see the world in this limited way. Expand yourself. So, as we're talking about things that are passed down from our parents or like from our fathers and stuff, like, you also got to think about the good things that they passed down to you. And like, even if they didn't actively tell you, neither one of my parents actively were like, you should move out of West Virginia. Not neither one of them. But they told me all the fun and like all the good things that like good times that they had when they didn't live in West Virginia. And like, I saw that there was possibility for me, and that you can always come home. Like, that's the thing that I have to keep in mind. I'm planning on moving actually at the beginning of next year. And the thing that's in my mind is that you can always move home. And it's not even that someone really taught me that, is that I saw that because both my parents moved back home, right? So just keeping those kind of things in mind as you grow and develop and, live your best life.
So getting back on track, because I'm good for a tangent here. But you said you wanted to start with your dad's death, work backwards, and then work forward. One of the things that grew out of his death was your idea to support other people who've lost their dads with the Fatherless Father's Day brunch. What are some other things that you developed after his death? Or even not necessarily develop, but just things that you learned about him, about yourself, or grew into something more.
I think that one of those things, I think, just to touch back on what I got from losing him, is realizing that a lot of people lose their parents early on in life, and a lot of people don't talk about that. Like, a lot of people don't talk about the fact that their father is gone, and like how that feels. The idea that like you won't have your father to walk you down the aisle, and like how emotionally difficult weddings can be, or like those kind of things are things that I picked up on, and how I ended up coming to the idea of like the fatherless Father's Day. Father's Day was never a big deal for me, but until I lost my father, right? Like, so having those kind of thoughts of being like, okay, how can you make something out of this thing that nobody really teaches you how to deal with? Nobody teaches you how to deal with like the loss of your parent. Like, what do you do at your wedding when your father passed away? A friend of mine, both of us lost our fathers to cancer kind of around the same time. And at her wedding, I really liked how she honored her father and like what she did to kind of get her, she had her brother walk her down the aisle and some other stuff. And it's like those kind of things that come to mind since my dad passed away. It's been 6 years. I can do math. It's been 6 years since my dad passed away. And I feel like things constantly come up for me that are like, oh, I didn't know that was going to bother me. Or I didn't know that that was a trigger for me. And that actually creates creativity in me, because like from that pain, or from that, I see ways to help other people. So recently, I think the Father's Day brunch has been like the biggest one that came up. But it is kind of consistent of like, how can you make lemons out of turn lemons into lemonade in these kind of situations. So I don't have anything currently that's actively coming up to my mind, but it is a lot of things that come up that make me be like, okay, what can I do to be like, to creatively make this, better?
And I like that you talked about weddings, because I think that was how you and I initially got on that topic. You were saying, oh, this is what you do. Well, I went to a wedding, and weddings are hard for me and I was like, oh, I didn't know that about you. But I'm in a wedding this coming weekend and one next year. And in preparation for those things, in relation to the brides, both of those women are my friends, and that's how I ended up being in their weddings. But one person I've known for almost 10 years, and I just met their dad this past weekend. Mm-hmm. And, they came over and introduced themselves to me, and I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, I'm supposed to know you. And then my friend was like, oh, that's my dad. And I'm like, oh, dang, I never really realized that I never met your dad before. and just, seeing the energy there was kind of interesting. Like, okay, this will be an interesting wedding. But then additionally, my other friend had an engagement party last month, and the family she's marrying into, first of all, the wedding is not for another year. I never been to an engagement party before, so this is all new for me. But her fiance had family travel from 7 to 9 hours away for a 3-hour engagement party and bring food. Like, they didn't just make the journey on a Sunday, which means they either missed church, came after church, or have to go to work the next morning. And it just was really a beautiful thing, because this person, similar to me, they have a father and they're attached to their father's family, but they're not necessarily attached to their father because of his incarceration throughout their life. So just seeing the whole space of weddings very differently, especially like last summer I was at my stepsister's wedding, and even though she grew up in another state, my stepfather is very close to his kids. So just seeing the different variations of how your father can be involved on different levels, or what type of emotion that brings up for you, or what type of void even his presence can provide a void. So
that's very true. That's very true. I had a thought, it went away. It might come back to me.
If you remember it, just send it to me and I'll put it in the show notes. I learned that from a different podcast. So from now on, the discussion room will have show notes. Is there anything else that you would like to share? Like, there's tons of things that I want to know, but I'm like, I don't know how comfortable you are discussing them.
I'm working on my vulnerability and honesty and truthfulness. So just ask. If I don't want to answer, I'll just say, I'll pass.
Lightning round. Okay. So you and I have talked on several occasions about identity, and just how many things that you're uncovering about how you've come to be in the past few years. No, seriously, because all I keep thinking about as I'm listening to you talk about what you've learned about your relationship to your dad is when I went to visit my brother, and his mom told me that as an infant, my father fed me M&M peanuts, and he shouldn't have. Like, yeah, because clearly I could have been allergic to peanuts, but like, that's my favorite candy. And for like a year after that, I wouldn't eat them. Once she told me that, I'm like, well, thank you. You just kind of ruined my favorite candy for me. But just, as far as identity goes, what are some other things that you've unearthed about yourself, through your relationship with your parents?
Is this supposed to be a quick answer? Because
no, just like I said, lightning round, because you were like, I'll pass. You don't want to answer.
Oh, okay. So, actually, I just learned this. This is actually really interesting, because I told you my other story, the orphan story, which is more about probably my mother than it is about my father. But I didn't realize, I've always thought for some reason that my parents just kind of had like a summer fling. Like, I've seen like a couple of pictures of them together while they were dating. Apparently they were dating for like a good amount of time, like over a year. My dad not always, but a lot of times my dad had my brothers, like he was the provider for them, like cared for them. Their mother had her stuff too. And apparently my mother was going to buy a house from her and my father and my brothers to live in. And I never knew it was that deep between the two of them. I don't know why. I guess because no one's ever addressed it. My mom never addressed their relationship ever. But my aunt was like, yeah, at one point, Paula was going to buy your dad buy a house for them to live in. And I was like, it was that deep? I didn't know it was that deep. Like, I thought it was just like an accident, baby. Just based on the rest of the story about my life, it's kind of like, I just thought it was like a summer fling baby. But apparently I was not a summer fling baby. I mean, yeah. So that was really interesting to find out that like their relationship was more than what I ever thought it was. It's just because we never really talked about it. So that was an interesting little tidbit of information that I could have potentially grew up in a household with my brothers.
Was your dad's death like an impetus for you to ask more questions? Because you said they don't talk about it, so you wouldn't have known. And I know for me, I ask my mom more things now, just because, with all these other people, I'm like, okay, well, my brother's mom said, and that don't add up with what you told me.
Yeah.
So.
No, I think I think now that I'm older, more conversations come up about things that they feel that I'm ready to hear, I guess maybe is what happens, because like, or also that was my aunt, which is my mom's sister, who told me that story. But even my dad's siblings will tell me stories. And part of that is I wasn't around them a lot when I was younger. And now that I'm older and I make a conscious effort to be around, it's like, they have an opportunity to tell me more stories about certain things. There's like this story from when I was a baby that my grandmother, my father's mother, like looked at me and was like, "Oh, she's a Bradford because she has our forehead," right? Like, and I always heard that story as a kid, right? And that's the only story I know about my paternal grandmother, that like being around me. She passed away. I was probably like 1 when she passed away, so I didn't know her, but that's like one of the stories. I was like, oh, she probably was a funny person, right? Like she's cracking jokes about babies' foreheads, like. So that kind of stuff comes up. I forgot your question, honestly, but those kind of things, those kind of things come up a lot recently that are just like little small tidbits of information that like help you realize like who you are. Identity, that was your question. And how you came about. I think that's, learning how you came about as a human being is like always really interesting, whether you were planned or unplanned or whatever. Like, it's interesting to hear stories from people who were around at the time being like, oh yeah, I remember this about you. I remember what I was going to say earlier. It's like, it's also a weird situation when people see you, meet you, and are like, oh, I didn't know Kenny had a daughter, like something like that. Like, those are always like awkward encounters of being like, oh, you're Kenny's daughter? I didn't know he had a daughter, or like something like that. So that being a part of identity of being like, yeah, you probably didn't know that was my dad, huh? Like, that being a part of interactions that you have when your parents weren't married or something like that, that probably most people, well, maybe not most people, that people who did grow up in those situations don't think about the impact of someone saying something like that. Because that's
kind of rude to say.
It's kind of rude to say to a person like, oh, I didn't know you existed.
Right. And that's funny because as you were saying that, I'm like, dang, that's really rude. Somebody I know.
I recently had someone say that to me. That's why that's like top of mind.
Yeah.
Within the last month, someone being like, I'm 29 years old. Like,
right. Like, that's very disrespectful, actually. I was thinking that in my mind. I'm like, dang, she's almost a whole 30 years, and somebody said that to her.
A whole 30 years old, and people still didn't know I existed. So,
but just what you were saying as far as origin stories, I don't know why with this whole Black Panther piece going on. I thought like Marvel origins, and then just like somebody I know was saying to me that after being on the discussion room, they went and talked to their family, and they found out like their parents, that they're technically a product of an infidelity. And that really bothered them. And like in several interactions with them afterwards, they kept bringing it up. And I had to be like, are you okay? Like, because now I feel like it's my fault. Like, okay, we don't have this whole conversation. It wasn't even really about your parents. It was about you as a parent. But it made you curious. And you brought it up. And it just said something to me that it was rooted in sarcasm and kind of a joke. But I could tell that the person was in pain about it. So just like knowing your origin story can be difficult for people.
So that's part of my situation too, right? Because my father was technically married at the time. My father never divorced his wife. Now, they were separated forever and ever, but really, I didn't know that they were still technically married until my father passed away and his wife was there, right? I mean, I knew who she was. I met her before. It wasn't like that. But she was one of the people that she never was like, oh, I didn't know you existed. But like, she would see me and not say anything to me, but I knew who she was. And then now that my father's passed away, that relationship has actually changed because, again, I've inserted myself into this family, right, that I belong to. And I'm like, y'all just going to, like, not that nobody wants to hear me.
Acknowledge me.
And then I remember at Christmas last year, just this past Christmas, me and her having a discussion. And I was like, I don't really know, what to call you. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to call you my bonus mom. And that literally made her so happy. When I tell you, like, on Facebook now, she reposts my pictures and like, look at my bonus daughter. And like, and it's kind of like a weird situation because like my father was technically married when I was born, but they weren't together. And like, you know, so it's kind of like a weird family dynamic, but it's like, I get this other person who supports me in what I do. Like there's this person who I didn't have a relationship with before my father died. I did not have a relationship with her at all. But now that I've decided to be invested into my father's side of the family more, I get this other person who, you know, I can, you know, see supports me in the decisions that I make.
Your village has grown.
My village has grown. And that came out of death. So, you know, like, I don't think if my father was still here, I think I probably would still be taking that for granted. Like, and I probably still wouldn't have inserted myself into making sure that I was at family functions and things. I don't know for sure, but, you know, I know now that because of that, you know, my other brother, my brothers have a younger brother who lives in Florida now, and he just had a baby. So I have another nephew, right? And so he's my nephew, even though me and him aren't blood relatives, he's my brother because that's how I was raised. I was raised that your brother's brother is your brother too, right? And I'm cool with that. And like, so now I'm like, oh, I have a new nephew. They live in Florida. Like, I want to go see him, like send them gifts and stuff like that. Like, I get to be Auntie Tish again. So like, giving yourself that space to let family be family and be fluid and be open and like give yourself some permission to not have a perfect family, but have the family that you have. Your family of origin is what you have, and you can do what you want with it.
I think some of the things that we find to be weird or nuanced, we experience in isolation, not realizing that there are so many people,
so many other people
in space going through that. Like, for me, I have a question for you because I know my own bias, but how do you feel about last names? Like, when you have a child that's not a child that's born of marriage, what, you know, whose last name should the child have in your opinion?
Girl, do you know my story?
I know some of that, but I'm like, I know my own.
Nobody, I don't got my mom's last name. I ain't got my dad's last name. Like, so last name is my personal opinion about it is that the people who are raising you, it's easier to have the last name of the person who's raising you. That's my personal opinion about it because that's how I was raised, right? I have my grandmother's last name because my grandmother raised me, and all through school, I have her last name. Now, my mother's like last name story is kind of complicated too because she didn't have her father's last name, and her mother got married shortly after she was born. So my grandmother's last name changed, and my mom's last name wasn't officially changed, but she always went by Carr growing up too. So it's like, I got a last name of a family I'm not technically blood related to. And my mama didn't really carry that name, but she went by that name. So it's very like, last names are kind of like, go by the name. I mean, for me, in my mind, because of all that, it's like, go by the name of the people who's raising you. And that's that. Like,
it sounds a lot better the way you phrased it, because in my mind, it's the same thing you're saying, but I have my mom's last name, but I have my mom's last name because she was the one who's raising me. And when my sister came to be, my mom and my sister's dad got into disagreement. She's like, listen, this child is my child and my other child has my last name, and I think that we all as one unit should have the last name. If we go ahead and get married, then we all can have your last name. But for now, in my home with the children that I'm raising, you know, they'll have my last name. I'm not going up to the school and they calling me your last name, and that's not mine. So, you know, when I had, my sister has children and they don't have the same last name. Like, they all got different last names, and I'm like, okay, this didn't have to be the situation.
And that's a choice, you know?
Yeah, no, it is a choice. But for me, I was biased. And that's what I'm saying. I had my own bias in that area, because for me, that's just not the way. That's not how I learned to bake cake.
Yeah, that's not how you learn to bake cake.
Yeah, that's not how I learned to bake cake. So, you know, and then I had friends who had their dad's last name because their dad was their primary guardian.
or because their dad was in their life, right? Like if I
Right.
think if my dad was actively in my life, maybe my last name would be Bradford. But for me, the thing about the last name is like, I know I'm a Bradford. I know I'm a Berry. I know I'm also kind of a Carr. Like, like I was raised as a Carr. I've been a Carr my whole life. But, I know my origins. I've never not known who my family members were. That's never been an issue for me. So carrying the last name has only been an issue when there's drama with my last name. The Carr family got some drama where I'm from. There's always there's drama with the last name Carr. And people be like, oh, you're related to such and such. And I'm like, yes, but no. Right? So like that's the only time having a different last name. The only time I've ever thought about my last name really is when stories come up like, oh, when you were born, your last name wasn't Carr. We had to get your name changed for school, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, cool. Like I knew that growing up. Like, I knew I was, a Berry when I was born, which is my mother's father's last name, which my mother never carried that last name. So why she put that on my birth certificate, I don't know. To this day, I don't have no idea why that was her decision. But it's kind of like it made more sense for me to have the same last name as the person who was signing the papers for school. And I'm cool with that. And if I have kids, I plan to have kids in wedlock, but if I don't have kids in wedlock, if my children's father isn't in their life, my kids are going to have my last name. It just is what it is. It's just, they'll be.
So that's how you learned how to bake cake.
How I learned to bake cake, and that's how I'm going to bake my cake.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I know you have other things on your itinerary for the evening. But I do want to give you the opportunity to tell people, I know, where to find you, what else you're getting into, and, any final thoughts you have about your discussion here in the discussion room.
Okay, so this is where you can find me. You can find me on Instagram at LaTisha.Carr, and on Twitter at LaTisha Carr altogether. And my website is LaTishaCarr.com too. So obviously I'm very invested into my last name, right? You can find me on those plans. Just search my name. I am so happy to be on here. I love just having conversations. So I love that this is called the discussion room because it doesn't put any parameters around where the conversation goes. We can start a place and move forward. So I'm thankful for this space to just have this discussion about life, like, and how we've come to be and like those kind of things and how we learn to bake cakes. And as far as anything coming up, I don't have a lot coming up. I really am taking a little bit of time to just work on myself, work through some things mentally and emotionally. So I'm kind of taking a pause from like putting a lot of content out and putting a lot of different things out. But be on the lookout because that can always change. I am a creative person and sometimes I just decide to do things. So just be on the lookout for upcoming things. I just don't have anything huge planned coming up.
But you have a
my Dream Chaser journal. Thanks. But you can go buy my Dream Chaser journal on Amazon or on LaTishaCarr.com. Please do that. Definitely buy the Dream Chasers journal. It's a 90-day self-care journal to help you just focus yourself, your mind, on your own well-being as you chase your dreams and goals. So.
And my endorsement here, what I like about it is that before she released this Dream Chasers journal, she would talk about it on her Instagram Live and on her IG stories about how this is a part of her own routine. I'm so happy and grateful. Not, listen, don't judge me because I'm not on day 90 yet. But, and then the things you're thankful for. My affirmation today is, so definitely get you one. Let me show y'all where I did use it so y'all don't think I'm just out here endorsing stuff. But my notes are in there. I do use it. Get you one at LaTishaCarr.com or on Amazon as well.
It's on Amazon Prime. You can have it in 2 days.
Okay. Anything else?
That's it for me. Thank you.
So what's one thing that describes you? What do you want people to remember you by? Because I kind of got you a little bit off track with your original thoughts when I threw the book up there. So,
Dream chaser. I want people to remember me as a person who chased their dreams and encouraged other people to do the same.
All right, and that's that. Thank you all for joining us in the discussion room. Thank you so much, Tish, for gracing me with your time, and it's always a pleasure. All righty then, guys. Catch you next time in the discussion room.